Hello and welcome to part 2 of the lesson, where we talk about terminology and the stages of animation. In part 1, we got as far as making key poses, breakdowns, and in-betweens. In other words, the rough animation. And today we continue with the remaining stages. So what's next? Next, let's say the scene has been approved and needs to move on to the next stage. Someone has to clean it up. In other words, all these rough sheets of lines need someone to go over them on a new layer and clean up the drawings so they're suitable for coloring and don't have all these scribbles anymore. And if the animator, like I did in this case, worked quite roughly, the person might have to do even more to fix some inaccuracies in the animator's design. That's why the animator, the cleanup artist, and the colorist always have the character models on hand so that everyone is looking at the same thing and drawing the same thing, ensuring there are no differences or inconsistencies with the designs as well as with the world of the characters. So let's imagine that we have this model somewhere, whether it's already placed in the scene or we have it off to the side. It's easiest to work when the model is inserted into the scene so that it's always in front of the eyes of the person working on it. In this case, let's say we have it. Once the design is done, we move on to the next stage. Cleanup, now with the color and the final brush, which has been approved and set as the design by the art director or director. So before that, we have an approved line and approved color. And we start working on the cleanup. The rough animation doesn't confuse us. We can either press this button here and make everything visible with the outlines of the world that's set here. Or another thing we can do is right-click, go to properties and change from the visible option to opacity. Or for example, set it to 30%. And when we click OK, everything becomes 30% transparent. This way, when we draw over with the final line, the rough animation won't get in our way. This is also how the cleanup artist starts cleaning up the animation. They follow the same sequence for cleaning up the drawings, which the animator used to animate the scene, meaning they will clean up 1, then they will clean up 21. After that, they'll also clean up 11, yes, and also 7. I forgot that we added that. One more key pose, and then they will clean up the breakdown or the 11th. It will be checked by the supervisor of the cleanup, and only after there is approval from the supervisor will they move on to cleaning up the individual ones. And when they get approval for the individual ones as well, the scene will move on to coloring. Only during coloring, the hierarchy is not followed. The hierarchy is not observed, and the scene is not done in sequence, for the simple reason that there are virtually none room for improvisation, and even if there is something wrong, it can be fixed more easily afterwards. Whereas in the other stages, both the supervisor and the director need to be sure that the one-to-one group animation is followed and that it is done well. The animation is responsible for meeting the director's expectations. During the key animation, the volumes and consistency of the character are maintained. This way the volumes are maintained and everything looks tight and consistent. That's why you look at it step by step, so that if a mistake is made somewhere, it will be much easier and much faster to correct a single drawing than to correct this drawing and all its related ones, which would have been led in the wrong direction, are significantly impacted by this unfortunate error. So we clean it up quickly. Now I won't try too hard. To strictly follow the volumes 100%. And the forms, because I want to show you the stages rather than make, the perfect scene. That's not the goal here. So now I already have the cleaned up key poses. Let's say the director has approved them for me and I move on. I also clean up my breakdown and I clean up the in-betweens as well. Now, when cleaning up the in-betweens, it's good to be able to see the already cleaned up ones in case there are any changes. We need to see them in real time and take them into account as we clean up. Now here the character is quite simple, but with more complex ones there might be a need, especially when there has been a significant change, to see the previous and the next drawing so we can take them into account, this change, and reflect it in the in-between drawings. The other reason is to make sure that after it's been cleaned up, the key drawings, when we add the in-betweens, especially when they're very close together, like in this case, I see that this eye will go a little higher and will jump when I play the cleaned up drawings afterwards. When I play that rough sketch, I see that I need to clean it up a bit lower. This way I prevented it. A mistake that if I had more in-betweens here could have significantly impacted the next drawings, and that way I would have to do more than one drawing afterwards. So now here things are a bit further apart. I don't need to turn on that sketch layer, but again I have to be careful when cleaning up the distant drawings. The better way to keep things consistent is to turn off the rough animation and just review. After adding some new lines, for example, now I've only drawn the circle, check it. It looks good. Now I'll add the eyes and check again. If that too turned out well, I move on from there, the final detail, after which I'll check again. Without the sketch layer, I also check what I've achieved so far by playing the available cleaned up drawings. And again, I watch for any changes or shifts in the volumes and any such mistakes. That's how I keep going. The next in between. We have the 13th. So we check again. And we just keep going. So now what I notice here and is wrong in the animation, I did it on purpose, of course, so I could show you. Sometimes this is what assistant animators have to do. That's what we call the people who clean up the scenes. Now here, the head should already start to turn, and you can see how this eye touches the edge of the head here. But in this case, the eye, I drew it, or the animator did. If the scene is split between the key and the assistant, the animator drew it like this. So the head still looks the same, or it doesn't turn at all. To the right, or even the opposite, here the distance actually increases a bit and it looks like it's starting to turn in the opposite direction, which shouldn't happen, and that's something that also needs to be watched for. In other words, here the movement should continue the direction it's supposed to go, and the head as well should turn. To the right, with 2, we make this slight adjustment. That's the good thing about working in a team, that if someone does make an unintentional mistake, the next person can correct it. But of course, you shouldn't abuse this and to work carelessly thinking, oh, the next person will fix it for me. On the contrary, we should always strive to do our best. Always to be as thorough as possible and to keep in mind that someone else will come after us. They'll take over the scene and we shouldn't burden them with our responsibilities. On the contrary, we should help each other. And that's that. Because after us, the compositing team comes in. And if everyone only thinks about themselves and leaves mistakes for the next person to fix, that's not cool and it's not teamwork. So here we'll also reflect the change we made in the previous one so that it rotates nicely. So the last intermediate one remains, which if they're too close, in this case, they're not that close, but sometimes. Now I'll do something so I can demonstrate them. I'll move this one even closer. If they're this close, or sometimes even closer. If the animator or the director wants the movement to stop very slowly, there might not be just 1, but 3 or sometimes even 5 drawings here. Which means that in a very small space, a lot needs to be added. In terms of the number of drawings, then it's better the rough animation to leave it out, since we know that this drawing needs to be exactly in the middle between these two and to make it truly perfect. And to hit the middle without worrying that the rough animation underneath will get in our way. It's better to turn off the layer with the rough animation and just to clean it up now using the clean drawings, because it has a much cleaner and more precise line, and there's nothing to confuse us. In fact, it will actually be much easier for us. So as of right now, this actually ended up turning out as a cleanup. Once we have approval on the cleanup, it's time to move on to coloring. The coloring team takes the color model and accordingly the colors. Usually there is an approved color palette for them to work with, and then they start to go through and color in the drawings. In Anime, this happens on the same layer as the outline, but in other software, this same thing occurs on another separate instance. You can see his ninja outfit. We color his face. Let's give him blue eyes, for example. And the scene is ready. And that's about the terminology, building the scenes and the stages in drawn animation. As I said, we will explore the world of rigging and character design, and in instances where the animation is not traditionally hand-drawn, we'll also talk about how to construct a dynamic scene using a rigged character. Generally, the same principles are followed there, but when we already have a prepared character, it saves time. For instance, the coloring process, because we already have a fully finished character, but then we consider this terminology and way of building the scene is fully in effect and happens exactly in this way. Of course, certain things are still used as well. The advantages of the software, mainly when adding the in-betweens, but that's it for now. I hope this has been useful to you, and most importantly, that it will help you understand and work with the terminology in the upcoming videos. Write in the comments below if something wasn't clear to you, or whether you found this useful and interesting, and so on. Any kind of feedback. It will be helpful to me. Goodbye for now from me, and I'll see you in the next video.